and from clandestine drops of food and water, and most importantly gasoline, and often contraband materials brought in like cold Coca-Cola and pepperoni pizza, tobacco to bribe the troops to get to one side of the town to the other. So it takes a team to do this, and I felt alone on the boat a lot of the time, but I was never lonely. I knew there were people on the outside helping me. So you put together an amazing exhibit here, and I know you're still in the works on this. These guys started with Greg Lambusi and John Minzer. They started this ball rolling the very first days after the floodwater subsided, and they've been working on this ever since. Every couple of months I would get a phone call and they would tell me what was going on, and I just never imagined that the boat would be here where the submarine was. And so I'm honored beyond words that this has all been put together. I wanted to tell you a quick story about how this boat ended up here, and why this boat, out of the dozens and dozens of similar stories in every corner of the city where you had citizens grabbing boats and helping other citizens, this boat stands out among those. As Sam said, it was more than 400 people brought to dry land on this boat, including a couple of dozen of soldiers, Louisiana National Guard that drove their trucks into the deep water. And you would think the Louisiana National Guard would know better, but you know, this boat had some really impressive numbers. It was one of the very few boats that worked at night during Katrina. It worked from the very first day to the very last day when I found it beached on a sidewalk on Napoleon Avenue. It's hard not to get emotional, sorry. But I'll tell you quickly, they told me I have 3 minutes to talk to you, and obviously the person that told me I have 3 minutes has never heard one of my stories. But the boat started its history with Katrina the day after the floodwaters inundated the city. And there was a halfway house in uptown New Orleans, and there were recovering drug addicts in that house, and they decided that they weren't going to sit around and get rescued, that they were going to go out on their own missions and start rescuing people themselves. So it was those guys. They started down Napoleon Avenue, and it was those guys, and I want the press to get this clear, it was those guys that hotwired the boat. Not me. They met up at the hospital. They met up with the maintenance supervisor of Baptist Memorial Hospital, and he told them, if you go across the street, there's an office building, and under that office building you'll find this boat. And if you could float it over here, we could start getting some of these people out. And those guys, people have lengthy criminal records and trying to get their life back on track. Those guys started the evacuation of Baptist Hospital. A couple days later, I was paddling down Napoleon in my boat. I had a list every morning that was faxed to me, that was text message to me from New York, of addresses and names of people. Every person that I found invariably dumped me out of that pirogue. So I told my girlfriend that I was going to have to find a bigger boat. And I stumbled across these guys doing this fabulous work. And the area around Baptist had become a little bit militarized. So recovering drug addicts and police, they don't do well together in close proximity. So they started pulling people out of their houses in the area. And I went along with them. And with that list in hand, that day we checked on 100% of those houses that were in my phone. We continued this work for days and days, and the second day that I was working with those people out of the halfway house, their preacher walked up on St. Charles Avenue, and, excuse me for 1 second, he gave me this. It's a screwdriver. This was our key. This is how we started the boat every morning. He said he was taking his guys out, he was bringing them to Dallas, they couldn't handle the stress anymore, and he left me the boat. And those days were, I was kind of alone, so those were kind of terrifying. And I had to fend off a lot of people from the boat that wanted it. It was a hot commodity, so it was the fastest boat in town. It was the only boat that was dependable, the one that ran, And every day when I was coming back up to the corner of St. Charles and Napoleon, I had dozens of people. The other boats, most of them had dozens of SWAT team members. So I guess I looked a little less intimidating than a SWAT team coming up to your house and having guns pointed at you. So I continued this work for another day and a half, and then I found myself surrounded by military personnel. And this big rough and gruff sergeant from the California National Guard, Sergeant Leo Boucher, he stood up and said, "Where you from, boy?" And I said, "I'm from Uptown." He said, "Where's Uptown?" I said, "You're standing in Uptown, Sergeant." And he had the same reaction. So he said, "We're taking your boat." I said, "That's fine." He said, "We're going to take you too." So from there on, I was basically put in control of all the water rescues in Uptown New Orleans. And I want to make it clear, I don't have any training in search and rescue. I've never been in the military, so this was very foreign to me, but I took it very seriously. I thought it was the biggest honor that I've ever had. So every day they would assign me about 15 new soldiers. We'd get in the pirogue, paddle out to Pascal's Manali where the boat was tied up, get in the boat, come back, pick up more soldiers, go back out, steal more boats, acquire more boats, and we did this every day until the California National Guard. This was a quick reactionary force. They go into an enemy territory and they take over all the utilities and the water, and they get the area that they're in back up and working. And it was these guys, the California National Guard, that got the pump turned on at Broad and Washington. And it was these guys that drained the city. So when I walked up and found the boat on dry land, I was dragging that pirogue from St. Charles Avenue to Claiborne. And that's a long way to walk with a pirogue. And suddenly my mission here was over. It was very clear for me when we were floating, but when I was walking, I really didn't have a purpose. So I kept returning to the boat day after day after we were still searching for people in their houses on foot. And the guard liked to use me in a way that skated around what their rules were. They were told we can't kick in doors, but I was a civilian, nobody told me that. So we were still pulling people out, very sick people, dying people, but it was absolutely one of the most rewarding times in my life, one of the things that I am most proud of, and I've done some things. And about 4 or 5 days after, I was standing with the chaplain of the California National Guard and their commanding officer. And some ladies drove up in a car and were taking pictures of the boats, and there were about 25 boats on the corner there of Napoleon and Claiborne. And as they rolled up to us and snapped a picture of me, and one of them looks at me and says, "You know, it was a damn shame people were driving around in these boats and just joyriding them." And, you know, those words struck kind of hard, because I looked around and it looked like a party had gone on, because there were a couple of dozen beautiful white fishing boats and cabin cruisers and skiffs, and it looked like there was a party. So I grabbed my magic marker, and when you do get to see the backside of the boat, and you'll get to see the words that I wrote on it, and I wrote some words more like a letter of defiance to the rest of the world, that we are not a city of losers, we are not a city of helpless people, that given the right tools and the right people and making the right decisions, and with the right team, we can do great things. So, Sam Reichert, thank you very much for putting this on. I'm honored more than you would ever know. Thank you. One last thing. After we hot-wired the boat, these are the keys we found in the glove box about 10 days later. So, Ward Howard and Jeff Haynes.